没问题，没问题，你自己。对，没问题。嗯，哎，我们有水吗？我们两个，上次好像各有一杯矿泉水之类的。
谢谢。OK，好。谢谢。我们开始 live 了吗？是你 YouTube live 就是从开始这一周 live。
Right. 一直到in Taiwan, and both of my parents worked in the press around the time. So they lived through the time where Taiwan really didn't have press freedom, and then enjoying this vast blossoming of press freedom and expression. And so in our generation really is the first generation where we enjoy both the personal technology from personal computers and also the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. So tell us a little bit how you grew up to be interested in the intersection of democracy and technology. Like what unique educational experiences or work experiences have shaped your views?
Sure. So between 89, which is the freedom of the press, and 96, which is the first presidential election, Taiwan's democratization worked slowly but surely. The idea is that instead of a sudden revolution, instead of a sudden change like in many other countries with the third wave of democratization, the president at the time, Li Denghui, orchestrated a very gradual transition to peaceful democracy. And I think part of the reason why is that we have electronic technology, digital technology. 96 was also the year that Taiwan enjoyed the World Web in a very accessible form. It was very low cost. Everybody can dial to the websites of the presidential candidates and then see what their platforms are and so on. So I was actually helping out the presidential campaign actually at the time as a way to participate in a democracy for the first time through the intervention, if you will, of the World Web and the bulletin board systems. And that's how I got interested in the interaction between the technology and especially World Web and democracy, especially the presidential election.
Oh, okay. So can you explain a little bit how that ties into your views as a conservative anarchist?
Certainly. An anarchist is basically, sorry, anarchist is basically someone who believes that people works better if nobody forces anyone to do anything, if people work upon their own volition. And I think the long years between 89 and 96 it basically means that instead of jumping to a direct presidential election, jumping to a direct representational election, people had a lot of time actually using bottom-up methods. We were doing a lot of community development at the time, doing a lot of local-based like deliberations at the time. So I would say that because of the enabling of the digital technologies, the kind of direct democracy, deliberative democracy, grew at the same time as representative democracy in Taiwan. And this is kind of unique because in many other countries, representative democracy has been around for hundreds of years, and deliberative digital democracy only become possible after the invent of personal computers and World Web. But for Taiwan, it's the same. They had the same level playing field. So this is why this kind of bottom-up democracy grew with the representational democracy. So people naturally, I think, in Taiwan believe that there is a place for the civil society in the shaping of the political agenda. And this is how I define the term conservative, meaning conserving what we think is important, like the equal access, like the human rights, like the traditional values, how they carry into the digital world that needs to be conserved, and also the freedom of expression that defines the beginning of the internet needs to be conserved into the new century.
So you would view these, the freedom of speech, etc., as things that were like traditional values, even though these were things that were suppressed, for example, at the founding of the Republic of China?
Well, exactly. So I mean traditional values in the sense of traditional values of the internet.
Oh.
Because when internet was invented, it was also a very top-down organization. It was the DARPA, right, of the U.S. Ministry of Defense. But they quickly saw that its value lies in the cross interaction between the academia, between the public sector, and also eventually with the private sector. So they opened up the control of the internet to what we call a multi-stakeholder model, which basically means anyone who uses internet gets a say of how internet is being built. And this is what I think is the defining characteristics of what we call internet governance, is the idea that you don't have to be a representative of anyone. Anyone can represent themselves in the internet's making. So when I say traditional, I really mean within the 40 or 50 years of internet tradition.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. So what inspired you to come out of retirement and join the ministry?
Well, I've been working as a kind of understudy minister, as an intern minister for the previous cyberspace minister, Jacqueline Tsai Yuling, for almost 2 years now. Working with her is basically a collaborative method of following at the end of 2014. There's this new national agenda by the cabinet at the time. The new premier at the time, Mo Zhiguo, said that the government, the cabinet especially, needs to adopt a crowdsourcing as its direction, meaning that traditionally it was all decided by the government, in the government itself, for the people, but it's not with the people. So he says, okay, now we have to work with the people, include all the stakeholders in the early stage agenda setting. But it's easy to say that, but nobody really knows how to do that, right? so people interested and versed in internet governance was then recruited or invited to join this new kind of crowdsourced agenda setting. And that's why I decided to collaborate with the cabinet at the time. But at the time, I was really an advisor for the administrative and training the public servants. And now I'm still doing more or less the same thing, just with a different title.
Oh, okay. So do you think that they made that policy because of the sunflower movement, or didn't have to do with that occurrence at all?
Well, I think the sunflower movement showed that it's possible, right? But then the end of year election showed that it's desirable. It's like people have a will to elect the people who respect this kind of bottom-up agenda setting. So, of course, the prime example is Dr. Cohen joined Taipei City, who explicitly set open government civic participation as his platform, but to a lesser degree also to the other mayors who got elected and sometimes upsets, right? But because they either supported the Occupy or joined the Occupy themselves. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So moving on, our next topic is about government work. So what projects are you currently working on to increase public participation in government?
Sure. So my new role has open governance as my main duty, right? And open government, in my view, includes 3 parts. One is transparency, making everything that the government is doing as transparent as possible, and make it so that everybody can view it as early as possible. And the other part is civic participation. Now that everybody has access to what we're doing, I would invite everybody to contribute their facts, more feelings, and more ideas into the policymaking process. And finally, it's accountability. Like people, after they propose these ideas, would like to know what actual actions got taken because of their inputs. And again, the government, once we publish everything, we also want to know what kind of people are interested, who are really the missing stakeholders that weren't discovered in the previous processes. So all these things held each other kind of accountable in the sense that everybody knows what everybody's promise gets fulfilled. So what I've been doing concretely is to make sure that, for example, all the regulations, before this cabinet, they were announced maybe 7 to 14 days before its passing. And 7 or 14 days is very difficult for people to have a good understanding and a dialogue with the policymakers. So most of the time they didn't say anything, or maybe they say a lot of things but on the street. Right? And so they didn't say much of anything through the official channels because 7 days or 14 days are really, really too short. So one of my work is to make sure not only there's now 60 days for all regulations, but also within the 60 days, the ministry has to make substantial response to the public comments that were collected during the 60 days. And after that, we are also working on the transparency of the budget allocation, so that all the national plans, all the ministries' plans that use taxpayers' money now must be disclosed, like how much percentage it was completed every month or every quarter, and how much did it align with the original proposal. And then we also invite everybody to comment on what exactly gets done during this budget plan and budget execution.
Oh, okay. Thank you. At your panel on World Design Capital 2016, you mentioned the need for a tool to collect more public opinions. How do you moderate against rampant populism, problems such as trial by public opinion, or having the most fringe opinions becoming the loudest voices?
Sure. We use a combination of strategies. One is that we use this tool called POLIS, PLL.is, which is a two-dimensional representation of everybody's feelings on a particular topic. And the idea is that you go to this website, it shows you one sentiment on a public policy, and then you can press yes or no. As you press yes or no, your avatar, your Facebook profile, or Twitter profile moves in this space toward people who share very similar opinions with you, and you can see it in a cluster. Right? So even if like 5,000 people get mobilized to vote exactly the same, there will just be one dot in this two-dimensional map that maps people's diversity of opinions. So what we're saying is that we're collecting how diverse, how different everybody views the same facts. And then we show it back to everybody, including the minority and the majority. And then we say after a month's time, we're collecting everything above the threshold into our agenda. But the threshold is defined as, for example, in cases like the private dispatch of car dispatch system like Uber, we had a majority group with 60% and minority group with 40%. So we say, okay, now the threshold is 80%. You have to propose any sentiment to convince 80% the supermajority of people in order for it to be included in the agenda of the next step decision making. And it was calculated by taking all of 60 and then half of 40. So no matter how much you mobilize, like if you mobilize so it's 80-20, the threshold will become 90. So the idea is that no matter what, you have to still convince the majority of the minority group. So this basically dissuades people from proposing too radical opinions, but rewards people with very eclectic, like thought, nuanced opinions. So we got very high quality opinions at the end of the 3-week or 4-week period.
Oh, okay. So the system, sorry. So the system allows people, for the people in the majority, to give feedback and try to convince people who didn't agree with them previously that their views are more persuasive or conducive. Or
right. So basically, because by the end we have thousands of people participating with hundreds of ideas, so nobody really could read them all, right? So we rank them by consensus. Like if you manage to convince people who are similar to you, then the highest ranked group opinion gets visibility, and the cross-group consensus gets the most visibility. Contrast this with, say, Facebook, which the most divergent views often gets the most popularity, just by the sheer number of shares and sheer number of comments. So whereas one, like in the social media, it encouraged the most divisive, the most divergent view, in our space we encourage the most convergent view.
Oh, okay. So can you explain again how that the cross opinion works?
Sure. So basically the idea is what we call in mathematics is called principal component analysis. The idea is that if you propose some very radical opinions, a lot of people would vote yes, but a lot of people would vote no, right? It's divisive. So people who vote similarly is like on Amazon, for example, if you shop for a book or for a few books, then it learns about your reading habits and recommends the book similar to the books you have read, right? So we do the same, but just with votes, just with the votes on each other's sentiments. So after you voted for maybe the initial 9 questions, you can say, okay, maybe none of this represents my true feelings. So you type in, it's an open questionnaire. So you type in, okay, I think this and that. And what you have wrote then become a subject for other people to vote on. So people are naturally clustered around the people who vote similarly, which is how we show your Facebook profile among your friends. And then you may also discover that your Facebook friends or Twitter friends are actually on the polar opposite of the two-dimensional map. It's just you never talk about this public policy issue over dinner. But this has two effects. One is that it lets people understand that these people are not enemies. These are not just faceless aliens who are commit brutal things like often said in the presidential campaign, right? So these are your friends. It's just on this public policy you haven't really deliberated over dinner, and now you know. And then the next thing is that it shows that it's possible to converge. At the beginning of each of this interaction, often you see people clustering for corners with very little overlap between them. But because the mechanism rewards opinions that converge people's views, it ranks to the top. And so whereas people vote for things like with 70% consensus, they would get competitive and think, okay, I can propose something that wins 80% consensus. And once somebody has 80, someone would want to think, okay, so but I can do it better. I can do a 90% consensus point. And so because we reward things with better consensus, people spend their time thinking of how to convince people who are different than them, who hold different positions than them. So we then get much more nuanced view out of this system.
Oh, okay, cool. That seems like it'd be really useful, for example, in the recent presidential election. Okay, so moving on. Taiwanese bureaucracy is known to be very conservative and risk-averse. How do you move them to try to do something different?
Well, I'm also conservative, so that's alignment. And, sorry, I think the most important thing is that people are risk-averse because they really don't know what will happen when they fail. This is the same as startups. If the cost of starting a company is very high, then it means that the cost of failure is also very high. And in Taiwan, as well as in many other places, when we talk about startup policy, the policymakers usually focus on how to lower the barriers of setting a new company, so that if you set up 10 and fail 9 of it, you don't feel much of anything because the cost of failing is low. But in Taiwan's public servant system, the cost of failing is unpredictable because it all depends on, well, first, how the popular media frames it, and how the judicial process finds them, and so on. So because of the unpredictability of risk, most public servants, when they're making decisions, they try to overestimate the risk to the maximal amount, right? Like what would the worst thing that would happen, and then choose the minimum course of action that would evade avoid this maximal kind of risk. So it's not about minimizing risk, really. It's about defining risk. It's about making sure that, okay, if this policy fails, then after another 60 days, we can go back and do a revision. And if this policy is a bad idea, we have 60 days for people to voice their opinions. So it's not shameful if you have a draft that doesn't take care of many stakeholders, because those stakeholders will show up and tell you that, hey, you missed our voices, and it's okay to revise. Whereas previously, because of the old system that only allows 7 days or 14 days of opinion expressing, it has to be almost perfect before it could be announced to the public, because nobody really had voice of anything. And once it's passed, if you forgot about some stakeholder, they would let you know on the street. And that risk is very high, right? So by basically spreading the risk to the early stages of policy making, we make the risk containable, definable, and also share part of the agenda setting power, but also responsibility with the private sector and with the civil society, so that everybody carries some of the risk of a bad policy and some of the responsibility to correct it. If it proves to be a bad policy, then we are all responsible to do a second revision of it. So in that way, the public servant's burden is lessened, their risk is lessened, and so then I think they will then want to try something new.
Okay. Right. So basically, you guys are putting all of the risk at the beginning when you're making the policy.
At the moment, it's all at the end, right? So we're trying to spread it gradually toward the upstream, toward the beginning.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool. And so are there like concrete programs that you're doing this through, or is it just through like Polis and platforms like that?
Right, so there's two main platforms. There's the VTaiwan, the experimental platform that the GovZero and other civil society communities are carrying. So the agenda setting, the process even, is collaboratively defined with the civil society and with the private sector. But for the normal, like all everyday regulations, we have the joint platform which not only allows the regulation to be debated like every day, but also petitions, so that people can collect 5,000 counter signatures and then propose that their voices to be included in the agenda of everyday rulemaking. So this is basically how we install an institutional mechanism for people's voices to be systematically processed. And again, for the petition, we also have 60 days before each ministry have to make a substantial response. So if you go to join.gov.tw, you will see a lot of petitions that was made, that was handled very well by the ministries, and that has resulted in concrete regulation changes or law changes.
Oh, okay. And how is this different from, example, change.org or platforms like that where people can propose petitions?
Right. So this is most similar to We the People, where it's the White House, right? It was the presidential order that says all the ministries has to respond. I think the average response time of We the People is around 120 something days. So within 4 months or so, they would get a concrete response. But for things like change.org, it all depends on who takes the petition, right? It's possible that people don't take the petition, and so the petition is just a way for people to make friends, to meet similar-minded people. But there's no political mandate or empowerment that says, no, the ministry really must respond after 60 or after 120 days. So I think that the most difference is on the political empowerment of this petition platform.
Okay. And are we doing anything, or are you doing anything, I guess, to get the word out about the availability of these platforms?
Well, we're doing that right now, right?
Oh.
So
this is true.
Yeah, so on media and on several other places, we try to. But I think the most important advertisement is really up in each ministry. Because once one ministry, like Ministry of Healthcare and Welfare, who did really well the first 2 petition cases, each petition case, if they handle it well, it creates trust for those 5,000 people. And so those 5,000 people, after they have another policy contribution, they will be like, okay, so they handled our petition really well. So I'm now motivated to propose something that's even more interesting or even more radical at times. So I think really word of mouth is really the first thing that we want to encourage, and the first thing that we want to increase the quality of those responses. And then the platform participant will speak for the platform. And on the flip side, if the ministry doesn't handle the petition case well, if they just follow the procedure but they didn't really say much of anything, then the 5,000 people may get disillusioned. And so no amount of advertisement will bring back that trust. So I think we're just focusing on the quality of the responses.
Oh, okay. So have you considered, for example, collaborating with different media to get the word out about these platforms? Because I know, like, a lot of people, when they read the news, they'll get very angry or very impassioned about whatever it is they read, and they will want to do something, and this seems like it would be a good platform for that.
Right, sure. I mean, at the end of every huge media cycle, we always get some kind of petition. Not always 5,000 people strong, but some of them 5,000 people strong. And so, like as a concrete example, there's one right after one typhoon, because some cities have this half-day holiday. Like this half day you still have to go to work, but in the afternoon, because of typhoon, you have to go back home, and so on. It creates a issue of coordination. So there's 2 actually petitions, each 5,000 strong, saying that let's do away with those half-day vacations, half-day holidays. So I think this is a very real-time response for people to think through the repercussions of what will happen if we introduce such a policy. So it's not just something that's a knee-jerk reaction out of the media or out of the situation, but we invite people to think through as they were petitioning, write down what they think will take for this to happen.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to move on to startup environments in Taiwan. So Go Start a Company seems to become a fashionable trend in Taiwan, and as someone who has worked with and founded startups, what do you think of this trend?
Well, I think it's a natural part of Taiwan. And as I said already, actually, I think the main work that the government should do is to make failing, because if you spend a lot of time and a lot of capital to set up a company, a lot of efforts and a lot of hoops to jump through, and then you fail, the failure will feel like disappointing. But if it's trivial to set up a company, if it's trivial to get some initial buy-in to your venture and so on, then it doesn't really feel like a failure. It feels like a learning experience. And then people can probably say that I failed like 9 times, and then I'm still asking for another round of angel money because each of these are found in the very early stage that it doesn't meet the market, it's not a fit, and so on. But there wasn't much to lose in each of those cases. So then people wouldn't need to spend a lot of time just starting up, right? People can just develop their ideas, develop their networks, and so on. This is my main thought.
Oh, okay, awesome. And then there's a lot of talk about Taiwanese companies going global. And what do you think could be done to help that? What's stopping them from going global? And how can our international audience be helpful to this end?
Well, this is a very complicated topic that has a different answer to each industry sector, right? So I'm not going to, because of time limits, to go to the detail of that. But in the upcoming Digital Nation plan, we try to make the infrastructure such that no matter any of the industry that a startup or a established company who's looking for digital transformation is in, they still have the same basic infrastructure for them to, for example, have affordable bandwidth, to have affordable way of communicating to international audiences, to have affordable chances of getting venture capital, for example, from outside to recruit talents to Taiwan. We're simplifying all these protocols so that if you're watching this and interested in joining a startup in Taiwan, then the startup visa and all the implementation plans that follows after startup visa will make it much easier for the foreign talents to join the ventures in Taiwan and vice versa. And I think really once you are in Taiwan, Taiwan is a very attractive place. You will want to stay for the Medicare, for the food. So for these things, then we don't have to work too hard or too much to interfere with the private sector. But for the initial point of contact, that's what we can focus on.
Oh, okay. So as a minister without portfolio, do you actually have any sway in making this happen, for example, in making the entrepreneur visa more accessible or easier?
Well, it is actually the purview of the National Development Committee, which is headed by a commissioner, but also minister with a portfolio, Chen Tianji, and so that's his job. But I'm kind of an advisor on anything digital related. So if there's anything digital related, I just advise on these matters.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Audrey. Yeah, so that's going to conclude our section for Katagalan for now. Now, continuing on the topic of entrepreneurship in Taiwan, we're going to ask Daniel Lin, the founder of Future Ward and Future Ward Central, which is Taipei's largest makerspace and co-working space. So he's going to talk about tech in Taiwan and the challenges that foreigners face when they come to Taiwan and want to start a company. Thank you.
Thank you. For mine. So these questions, which I've not seen before, was collected by people in your makerspace?
Yeah, some
Okay.
just through discussions.
Okay,
But
that's
maybe I'll
great.
start with, there's a few questions I think Darius didn't have time for. So.
Sure. So let's do a quick question, quick answer format, where I try to answer everything 140 words, or something like that.
Okay. I'm Daniel Lin, and we're back with the digital minister. And so continuing on with the conversation regarding communities and things related to startups, at our co-working space and maker spaces, we tend to attract a very international crowd. And I was just wondering about your thoughts on the interaction between virtual communities and physical communities, since a lot of these international visitors are digital nomads who can work anywhere they want, as you have done frequently. So I was wondering what your thoughts are between the physical and virtual side.
Sure. Well, Taiwan actually has a pretty friendly teleworking regulation, which the V-Taiwan Public Deliberation Project have deliberated last year. So last year, where I was still advisor to the cabinet, we actually talked about exactly how teleworking is going to work in Taiwan for people. So not only they were pretty friendly in teleworking, at the moment we're also working on the implementation, as I said, of the startup visa and of all the implementation details of the way that attracts more foreign talents. And we understand that a lot of this is actually not about regulation. Even if we have very advanced regulation, a lot of it is in the culture. And it's true that Taiwanese culture, there's some celebration of diversity in terms of like gender and so on. People generally see it's okay. But in terms of languages and in terms of like cross-cultural pollination, we can still do better. And so this is why we also have a lot of startup innovation, like pitches, like all these trade events to facilitate more people to listen to more ideas, not just English speaking, but also internationally and any language really. And then we have a lot of cultural events from all sorts of different cultures happening in Taiwan. And it is true that mostly it's around the 6 major cities, but then we're trying to, as part of the Digital Nation Plan, to have each of the 6 major cities to play a regional development leading role, so that they can also help the other townships and cities nearby it to internationalize and basically put everything on the web, so that people can still follow from afar. And so basically it's to create a much more friendly environment for teleworkers and for people who visit Taiwan, decide that they like it, but they don't spend like all their days, every day, every year in Taiwan, but still follow up what's happening in Taiwan.
Oh, that sounds great. So I found that a lot of these visitors, once they're here, they find Taiwan very, very friendly place to be, very high value, and they want to stay. And then since they're living here, they want to contribute something to society. But they found actually there's a lot of confusion and frustration trying to either get settled here in terms of everyday living or actually working with the government. And I was wondering if the government has any new initiatives, or do you have any opinions on how this can be facilitated?
Well, I think the major change is not happening from the public sector, it's from the machine learning sector, because as of last month, there's been a major breakthrough in the English Mandarin bidirectional translation quality. If you use any of the online automated translators, there's been a new technique where they train the machine learning algorithms, so that now it actually gets it right most of the time instead of wrong most of the time when you do machine learning of our regulations and stuff. And I think this is really important, because in my office, what we call the public digital innovation space, our website is English first. We only really have an English website, but we were able to use automatic translation through machine learning to also present a Chinese version of our website. And this wouldn't be possible even just 2 months ago. So a lot of machine automatic translation, both in your pocket in the form of like you can scan a menu and then it shows the correct English translation, and it happens offline, as well as online translation. I think that's really going to speed up the communication. So now if you see a regulation that may affect you and you have 60 days to comment, empowered with this kind of automated translation, you can actually do a lot. And in my public dialogue board, the Wisely dialogue board, I actually get inputs from Spanish, from Madrid and so on, And they also use automated translation, and I see the quality much better nowadays, so that it's actually legible, and that we can engage in serious public policy discussions using our own native languages by the mediation of machine translation.
Oh, wow. Well, so a little off topic, actually.
Sure.
I'm curious. Using machine learning, do you think it's possible to use it to influence policy in terms of having an AI kind of analyze everything and then give options that then the governmental organization can
Actually,
discuss?
the police system that I described is a machine learning product. It uses machine learning to learn how people cluster together and so on. But I think the equally important thing is that we can't really make the decisions, which is a value judgment through artificial intelligence. What they can do is play the role of a neutral facilitator, a neutral moderator, or just a tireless secretary to collect all these opinions. And it's also important that its source code, its algorithm must be open for everybody to inspect and then to modify, because otherwise we have another black box in the regulatory pipeline and nobody wants that.
That's true. That's true. So do you think the international community in Taiwan can help advance these government initiatives?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure that people here who live here and like the environment here in Taiwan are already doing a lot of like cultural cross-pollination of ideas and citizen diplomacy and things like that. So I would say just continue doing on whatever that you're doing, and basically bring the same sense of passion and what you experience in Taiwan back home, and maybe attract more people to do more two exchanges. Because a lot of, although social media and online communities are very good nowadays, it always starts with a very high bandwidth, like face-to-face conversation, and then you carry on part of it to online. But it still has to happen with a very high bandwidth face-to-face meetup. And how to engage in this way, how to make this way happen, how to organize meetups. I mean, that is the community's expertise. And so just keep doing that.
Yeah, that's what we've been trying to do at our space.
Exactly.
Okay, and then you mentioned before in the government, there's a lot of risk assessment going on, and that tends to drive out a lot of creativity because they're afraid of trying new things. And so how do you think it will be possible to attract more creative people into not just government but business and even to influence the culture so that attitudes would be changed?
Sure. So defined risk, which I already talked about, is one thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is to make it fun. I mean, I'm officially a minister who works for fun. Right? When the premier asked me why am I aiming for joining the cabinet? Is it out of duty, out of obligation, out of the social mission, out of maximizing impact? The usual reasons. I'm like, no, I'm just joining for fun. So it is important because fun really is the kind of reinforcement that doesn't get tired over time. If you're curious about something and you learn something every day, then that curiosity grows. It doesn't fade with time. But if you're empowered with a sense of duty or obligation, once you do the same thing for 10 years, it's going to wear it out.
Yeah.
Right? So, but if you're still learning after 10 years, then you're just a better learner. Right? You still have the same passion of learning. So I think this passion of learning is really what we're trying to do, both in my office, where we have like people from 5 different ministries and institutions working together to improve their ministry's missions, but in a way that feels like, so this ministry is always like saying that it's doing something, but the other ministries are already doing like 80% of the job already. It's just they've never talked together, right? So this kind of cross-pollination is by itself very enjoyable. So this kind of learning organization and experience is what I would encourage any large-scale organization, not just the government, to adopt.
Yeah. Well, I think that plays into the whole learning by doing, and I found through our workshops with kids, like just giving them a fun project to do, they'll learn by themselves.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, So in terms of education, how are these digital policies going to be influencing not just education within the government, but overall population with the kids?
Sure. So there's 2 things. Before I joined the cabinet, I was a member of the K-12 curriculum committee. And our main product is the curriculum guideline, which is going to be in effect 2018. And in the 2018 curriculum, that is the first time that the national curriculum agenda put autonomous, and then communication, and then the common good as our driving values. Basically saying that schools are not there to teach things. School is there so that people can learn things. So it gives the learning's motivation back to the children and to the learners. And this is why we're starting as early as high school to have people to use the university system to pick their own curriculum. And then starting like computer science and data science education as early high school. And then also infuse all the education tools with digital tools and things like this. So what we're trying to get at the curriculum committee is basically saying nobody can predict when a child enters the public school system at 7 what the world will be like when she or he gets out of the system at 18. And nobody knows, not even the professors or the teachers know.
Yeah.
So what's most important is that during this 12 years, each learner, they learn how exactly to learn things. And that is the core competence that we're trying to get at. And so it's the same not just for K-12 people, but for the general population as well. So it's also important to publish as much as like our interview is a public education material under Creative Commons license, under an open license, so that people like me who decide to drop out of school can still view it on the internet and engage in participation and learning.
Wow, that's great. So, so the government is actually enacting a lot of these new ways of education. Wow. So, going back to the community at the international community, so they, for example, within education, they're trying to put their kids into school, but I found a lot of them actually are trying to homeschool now,
Right.
because they're not sure of how the education system is about to be changed. And then on top of the fact that a lot of them are having issues trying to get visas, besides even the ones that have married locals, they're having issues with citizenship. So how is the government addressing?
Right, the issue of citizenship and permanent residence and visas in general, I think it is very high on Minister Chen Tianzu's list. So I'm like every week I hear what's being done, what's left to be done, and so on. So I'm sure that a lot of these things will be worked out pretty soon, which is not my job, but I care about that very much. But what is my job though is to communicate these facts that the government takes this very seriously and is working on it. And also, like as of a few years ago, actually homeschooling is legal in Taiwan. We have 3 laws pertaining to experimental schools. So it's either through community, through some NGOs, or by yourself. Anybody can submit a homeschooling plan. It doesn't have to be 100% homeschool. You can spend 2 days or 3 days at school and 2 days or 3 days at home. As long as it's past the review board of your local city, then you can design your own child's curriculum, and it applies throughout the whole K-12. So it's really up to each learner to design their own curriculum now. And so basically this is news to many people because all those laws and regulations are new. So my job is to make sure that everybody knows that it's there now, make full use of it, and if you find something wrong, we have a system to correct ourselves, to make new revisions of it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think thank you for your time to answer my questions. And I think it's very helpful for a lot of people who are listening, actually.
So let's take questions on the internet, shall we?
Can I just get up?
Here's the mic.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So we're going to be back with questions from our internet audience. So first question is from Anonymous. In reply to your recent tweet to the real Donald Trump about climate change, how do you view climate change and what are you working on or would like to work on to help?
Sure. Personally, I care a lot about climate change. I was, of the past 12 months, I've spent 4 or 5 of those in Paris. And so I care deeply during the time the Paris Agreement on climate change was passed and so on. But I was in my private capacities at the time as an independent expert. Now, at the end of the year, in early December, I'm going to visit Paris again for the Open Government Partnership Summit. And the part of the summit talks about how civic technology, how government technology can help the civil society organizations to tackle the inevitable problem of climate change. And I think after the hottest year, which is last year, and then this year, that there really is no any dispute or any questions from the scientists that is warming faster than we predicted, and that the risk defining as 10% of a catastrophe happening may be earlier than we anticipated. So civic technologies in terms of analysis of what in energy patterns and so on are going to be an instrumental part of it because we have to act on the data now to tackle it. And as a data technologist, I do whatever I can to help to facilitate the interchange of data between all the different governments because they all collect and make decisions in a very different way. So the harmonization of data formats, not just for climate, but for everything, is something that I care very passionately about and what I'm trying to do as part of the Open API and Open Data effort here in Taiwan so that our data can be shared by the international scientific community. Of course, the international scientific community cares about a lot of things, but climate happens to be on top of everybody's priority at this moment.
Oh, okay. Is there any particular data from Taiwan that you feel would be of special importance to the international community?
Sure. In Taiwan, of course, we have a lot of data on biodiversity. Taiwan hosts, I don't know, 10% or something of all the marine species in Taiwan, and we also have unique measuring points around all the offshore islands and also on the island itself for the regional climate and the regional pollution levels and things like that. And all these things, we work very closely with the civil society to publish in a way that's useful to our nearby countries into the global international community. I'm not a climate scientist myself, so I cannot comment on specifics, but I work on the infrastructure and the data formats so that if any of the scientists needs, for example, hosting or cloud infrastructure and so on, then I'll just do whatever I can to help.
Oh, okay. Are there any troubles that you've run into in this capacity?
No.
No?
So far, I think Taiwan really has a very good cloud infrastructure, and we are the top of the open data index globally after all, meaning that our basic data is open. So basically, on top of this, we're now trying for more international exchange to make sure that not only our data is open in an open format, in an open license, but it can be processed by common tools of the international community.
Oh, okay. Do you feel that Taiwan's exclusion from the United Nations has hampered our efforts to contribute to the international society at all in this?
Well, as an anarchist, as an anarchist, I respect the United Nations. I mean, I submitted a paper. I couldn't be there, but presented by my co-author at the Habitat 3 conference about the right to the city and how to make sure that the process is the commons decide the city together and so on. So I respect a lot of what the United Nations is doing. But then again, just like any other organization, it has engagements that it can uphold and engagements now that some of the parties may not to uphold. So I also participate very heavily in what we call multi-stakeholder organizations, the prime example being the internet itself and the internet governance forums and so on, that also decides on things that concerns everybody on the planet, but in a way that's not really representatives of each country talking about their country's matters, but also any stakeholders declaring their stakes and participating in this kind of forum. The World Economic Forum is one such forum, and there's many other forums like this. So my previous engagement before I joined the cabinet was mostly with these multi-stakeholder forums, and I intend to continue that, which is not hampered by Taiwan's relationship with the UN.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Moving on. So, second question is, would you consider yourself a feminist? And according to you, what is the status of women in Taiwan?
Okay, well, we have a woman president. Right, I will not comment on other countries. And then the idea, I think, of feminism in Taiwan has gone through the same waves as other places, right? First is the equal rights, equal pay, and equal treatment. And then it's about not being defined by specific gender roles. And then it's about a more proactive intersectional way that sees, many like minority groups were in the places of women were a few decades ago, so that people who are activists in the feminism movement now contribute their expertise in the LGBT movement, in other minority movement, in Aborigines and new migrants and things like this. And so basically the idea of intersectionality means that the feminism activists understand what it is like to be oppressed, what is it like to be suppressed, what is it like to be seen as an other. And now that they're gradually mainstream, they can use the same experience they learned to help people still in that position.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you would consider yourself a feminist, or?
Well, I mean, I learned from some of the great feminists like Judith Butler and so on. So I would say that I inherit part of this tradition. I inherit many other traditions.
Thank you. So backpacking off of the previous comment on LGBTQ, how involved are you in the transgender and LGBTQ politics in Taiwan? And have you been able to speak about these issues with the Executive Yuan or with President Tsai?
Right. I think President Tsai is unique that she includes LGBTQ rights and in effect marriage equality to be very concrete as part of her agenda and platform when during the presidential campaign. And it was very brave for me. That's one of the reasons why I voted for her, is that wasn't actually the majority opinion for her party at the time. It was slightly moving toward majority into a tendency, but not a definite like supermajority. So she is in a sense setting the agenda for her party by declaring this publicly as her presidential agenda. So it doesn't really need my convincing. she's already
already there.
Yeah, she's already there. Exactly. Yeah. So I think the most what I can do is basically being a example of what a transgender person can contribute to policy, not because of my transgender status, but because of my training as a computer scientist, as a digital policy maker, and things like that. And so, like, this is normal. This is not something that people should over-focus about. And being normal, I think it is the opposite of being an other. And most of the suppression and misunderstanding and bullying and everything stems from being an other, right? So just by de-othering the LGBTQ community, I think that's my existential contribution.
All right, thank you so much. So just to clarify, you do identify as a transgender individual?
Sure.
Oh, okay, cool. Next question is, what kind of music do you usually listen to?
Okay. Well, my favorite music, which is on a loop for a few months now, is Hamilton, the musical. But Hamilton, the musical, is not one specific genre, right? I mean, it has hip hop in it, but it also has a lot of other musical genres, even things like the Beatles, what was in it, right? So I think I enjoy this blending of musical traditions and then new creations out of existing traditions, like using rap to communicate policy is something that Lin did, and nobody really did that in a major way beforehand. So I enjoy this kind of creations.
Oh, okay. Cool. Wait, so did you see Flahi's rap for President Tsai during election period? I thought it was really funny. All right, so next question is from David Green, communications strategist at DDG. What is Taiwan's plan for the future of work in an age of ever-improving automated manufacturing and AI machine learning? Could Taiwan introduce a UBI? And we might need to explain to our audience what a UBI is.
Right. The UBI is basically unconditional basic income or universal basic income, or there's many other expansions. But the idea is a basic income for all. UBI is a very complicated policy issue. People in all spectrums of the politics have proposed UBI in one form or another. But first, this is not any of our national agenda at the moment. We do not think that we have the capacity at this moment to support UBI for everybody. On the other hand, It is true that with the aging population and with ever more automation and everything, it is true that we have to disentangle the idea of work and the idea of a job, right? It used to be that people's work are their job, right? But more and more we're seeing people doing very creative work, but not outside of their day job. We're more and more seeing, because of the opportunity of teleworking, people who have a work-life balance that's different from people before the advent of internet or teleworking. And we're more and more seeing that the machines are not only taking people's jobs, but creating the jobs that weren't there before. Right? So all these are the trends that we watch, and as part of the 8-year digital nation plan, we're trying to make sure that no matter what the underlying technology changes, the society itself values innovations, it values creation, and it values inclusion, defined in getting people who were not part of the digital revolution and getting them into new positions created by those automated tools and so on. So it is not that we're switching overnight to UBI, but we're creating climate in which UBI would be possible. But whether UBI is to be introduced, I think it's up to the political climate, as you say. It probably would require something like referendum, and we both know what the previous referendum of UBI went. so there's some time before we can get there. But it is important as part of the education system, for example, that we don't teach people to become machines. We don't teach people skills that are going to be automated by machines. That we don't teach children that they have to fulfill a job in the society, in the sense that all the jobs are being drastically changed, sometimes overnight, through machine learning. So people still work in a creative way, they still make art, but this idea of people tying to a job forever, I think needs some disentanglement from our culture before we can move to any direction, including UBI.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is, what was your initial reaction to the U.S. presidential election, and how do you think it will affect your current work as digital minister?
Well, I wasn't very surprised, actually. There was an interview back in August in which I said, I think there's a lot of similar dynamics of the Occupy movement and the President Trump's campaign, in the sense that they were both masters of social media and the way of social media to mobilize outrage into action. So I'm not very surprised, but I think it will, of course, change part of my job, in the sense that I have to now work with the realization that the preparations of the previous administration in the U.S. is probably going to be changed, sometimes slightly, sometimes a lot, with the new administration. So we have to do our homework, and this is just part of the job.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So how does the U.S. administration affect your job as a digital minister?
Well, for example, to take a very concrete example, a lot of my policy work centers around preparation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And of course, I'm not the negotiation minister, that would be Mr. Zheng Zhou, but as part of the TPP, there's a lot of like intellectual property harmonization, like the Digital 2000, and all these policies are digital policies that we were trying to debate as part of our Taiwan process on net neutrality and things like that. Now, all these demands may or may not be the new administration's agenda. So we may or may not want to deliberate it. Some of them, like net neutrality, it makes sense also domestically. So we may still want to deliberate it. Some of them were demands from the U.S. that may not be demands anymore. So yeah, this is like that.
Oh, okay. So do you think the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement would still go through, or do you think it's gone now?
Well, it's not really my job to predict this, right? We just react to the actual realities. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And then our next question is, why did you think climate change was the most pertinent reason to invite President-elect Trump to come to Taiwan, per your previous tweet, as opposed to, for example, technology development or security with China or something like that?
Well, I think first, again, I'm not a climate scientist, and I just feel that in Taiwan, the new administration really puts a lot of focus on the clean energy and on the new forms of energy that will not only be more efficient and eventually less expensive, but also much more sustainable. And the sustainable development, I think, is something that the international community very much want the U.S. administration to still see as a priority. So that was my motivation.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Next question is, do you type on Dvorak?
No, I use speech input most of the time. No, yeah. So yeah, I type on QWERTY keyboard, but nowadays it's mostly speech input because recognition is good enough.
Oh, okay. What
Yeah.
programs are you using?
I'm
For
sorry?
what programs are you using for English and Chinese?
Well, it's just whatever's built in. So
Oh.
on this iPad is Siri recognition. On my Android phone, it's Google speech recognition.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And next question is, what can we do about Taiwan's critical cybersecurity weaknesses?
Well, it is part of the work of the Cybersecurity Office, Howard Jian, who is in charge of this. And this is a new unit after this administration set up specifically to deal with cybersecurity. Part of my role as a digital minister in charge of open government is what I negotiated with the premier before I entered the office, is that anything I can see, I can publish. Of course, after consulting with stakeholders and after setting a time. But things like cybersecurity, they're often confidential. They're often national security matters, right? So I set up this policy that I don't even look at them. So no confidential or top secret information passed through my eyes. So, which is why also I cannot give you an answer because most of the cybersecurity related matters are classified, and I don't even see classified information. But I do trust Howard Jin in taking care of these matters.
Oh, okay. Was there a reason you decided on that policy, like that you wanted to make everything
Transparent.
Transparent.
Yeah, because in our cloud system that we're building for all the executive yuan, all the administration, we have a flag in which that we can just switch and make that this discussion board public, right? So, and a lot of these are we want to feed into machine learning. We want to feed it into the ways that analyze these materials and so on. So if you mix the secret information with the unclassified information and then produce some aggregate results, then it is very questionable whether the aggregate result is classified or not. And according to our current interpretation of the law, any system that contains input of classified information has by definition its output as classified information, which will jeopardize the whole effort, right, of trying to do aggregate analysis, which is why we only work with unclassified data.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And finally, someone has responded, I love your dictionary apps. Can you make their databases available for Pleco, which is the primary Chinese dictionary app for
It's
foreigners?
done. It's done already.
It's done? It does?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you can download it on the internet?
Right, exactly. If you just Google for Pleco Mo Edit, then you get this extension pack. I think they're now building it into Pleco, I think, as one of the plugins.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right. And then a final question, just for myself. So I know that some Taiwanese youth who are also transgendered, and they have trouble coming out to their parents. And I was wondering how you personally came out to your parents and what advice you would have for youth who deal with parents.
Sure. I was like non-binary when I was as early as 12. So it's not much as coming out as saying that I don't really want to be confined into a specific gender role. So it was a very philosophical way in which that I came up with my parents saying that, well, just I drop out of school, I get to decide how I look like every day and how I behave every day. And there's a lot of experiments that I'm going to do. And so this is within this larger framework of experimentation with not only gender but also of identity, of the language that I speak, of the cultures that I choose to acculturate myself into and so on. So I would say that if you frame it as a experimentation, as a journey towards self-discovery, then it is easier because parents would want their children to experience as much as possible within a safe way. And then it also helps to prove that there is a safe space. There's a circle of friends who are tolerant, who are okay, who sees this as normal. And once you have this group of friends, then your parents may be much more willing to let you experiment. And this is true not only for identity or for sexual orientation, this is true for anything. So I think starting a startup, for example, is actually much more dramatic when I was 14 or 15, other than gender or any other experiments, because people know that most of startups fail, and for a teenager it could be very traumatic to fail one's first startup. So it took a lot of convincing. But after my parents see that I have a group of friends who are also into startups, who don't see failure as something shameful, and so on, they feel much more comfortable in letting me out, and in a sense, in a joyful way.
Oh, okay. So your parents, you would say, were also quite conservative, as probably most parents are.
Oh yeah, yeah. They were expecting me, to go all the way to get a PhD or something like that. But I mean, the world really has changed around '96 because of World Wide Web and because of the way that people can access to knowledge, right? So, and it is a material fact. So after demonstrating this fact to my parents, they were very reasonable people.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. So I think that concludes
That
our
wraps it?
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank
Okay,
you so much,
thank you so
Audrey.
much.
Mhm.
Mhm.